My neighbor informed me that he witnessed my wife with another man during my work hours, and here's how I retaliated against my unfaithful spouse. In the quiet suburb of Willow Creek, the sun gently rose over the neat row of houses, casting a warm, golden glow. Albert, a tall man with kind eyes and a ready smile, hummed softly to himself as he prepared breakfast. Today, like every other day, he would leave for work with the comforting image of his wife, Anouk, still asleep, her dark curls sprawled across the pillow. Albert and Anouk had been the epitome of a happy couple. They met in college, fell in love, and married shortly after graduation. Their life together was marked by comfortable routines and shared dreams. Albert worked as an engineer, while Anouk was a freelance graphic designer. Their evenings were often spent in each other's company, enjoying simple pleasures: a movie, a homemade dinner, or a walk around the neighborhood. As Albert poured coffee into his travel mug, he glanced at the clock. He prided himself on punctuality, a trait that Anouk often teased him about. He left a gentle note for Anouk on the fridge, a small token of his affection, and stepped out. The morning air was crisp, and the neighborhood was waking up. Mr. Jenkins, the elderly neighbor, was already tending to his roses. "Morning, Albert," he called out, waving a gnarled hand. Albert waved back, his thoughts already drifting to the day's tasks. It was as he was getting into his car that Mr. Jenkins approached him, a hesitant expression on his weathered face. "Albert, I hope I'm not out of line here, but there's something you should know." Albert felt a flicker of unease. Mr. Jenkins was a man of few words, and his serious tone was uncharacteristic. "What is it, Mr. Jenkins?" "It's about Anouk," the old man began, pausing as if weighing his words. "I've seen her a few times with someone else when you're at work." "A man." "They seemed close." The words hit Albert like a physical blow. His mind refused to process them. His Anouk, with another man? It seemed impossible. They were happy, weren't they? "Are you sure?" Albert's voice was barely a whisper, his mind racing with confusion and denial. "I wouldn't have said anything if I wasn't," Mr. Jenkins replied, his eyes filled with sympathy. "I thought you should know." Albert thanked him, his mind in a whirlwind of emotions. As he drove to work, the image of Anouk with someone else haunted him. He tried to dismiss it, to rationalize it as a misunderstanding. But the seed of doubt had been planted. The day at work was a blur. Albert found himself staring at his computer screen, the numbers and diagrams meaningless. His thoughts kept drifting back to Anouk, to their life together. Had there been signs he'd missed? Moments he'd overlooked? Returning home that evening felt different. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like uncharted territory. Anouk greeted him with her usual smile, oblivious to the storm raging in his heart. Dinner was a quiet affair. Albert watched Anouk, searching for any hint, any clue that could confirm or deny Mr. Jenkins' words. But there was nothing, just the familiar comfort of their shared life, now tainted with suspicion. As they settled in for the night, Albert lay awake, the shadows of doubt looming large. He knew he couldn't ignore Mr. Jenkins' words. The truth, whatever it was, needed to be confronted. But for tonight, he lay there, the weight of the unseen betrayal pressing down on him, a silent wedge in the bed they shared. The next morning dawned with a heavy stillness in the air, reflecting the turmoil in Albert's heart. He had spent a sleepless night, turning over Mr. Jenkins' words in his mind. With each passing hour, his initial shock had given way to a piercing sense of betrayal. Albert sat at the kitchen table, his coffee untouched, as he waited for Anouk to wake up. He watched her as she entered the kitchen, her hair tousled from sleep, unaware of the storm brewing inside him. "Good morning," Anouk greeted him cheerily, leaning in for a customary kiss. But today, Albert recoiled slightly, his heart racing. Anouk, sensing something amiss, frowned. "Albert, is everything okay?" He looked at her, really looked at her. This was the woman he had loved and trusted for years. The thought of her betrayal was unbearable, yet unavoidable. Taking a deep breath, Albert decided it was time to confront the truth. "Anouk, I need to ask you something," he began, his voice steady despite the chaos inside. "Is there someone else?" The color drained from Anouk's face. For a moment, she was silent, her eyes darting away. Then, with a sigh, she nodded. "Yes, there is someone else." The confirmation hit Albert like a tidal wave. The room seemed to spin around him as a myriad of emotions crashed over him: anger, sadness, disbelief. "How long?" he managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. "A few months," she replied, her voice laced with regret. "It just happened. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Albert struggled to process her words. The life he thought they had, the future they had planned, it all felt like a lie now. "Why, Anouk? Why did you do this?" he asked, his voice rising with a mixture of pain and anger. Anouk looked down, her fingers nervously playing with the hem of her shirt. "I don't know, Albert. I was feeling lost, and he was there. It was a mistake." A mistake. The word echoed in Albert's mind. He had devoted himself to their marriage, to her. And yet, it had been so easy for her to throw it all away. The room was heavy with a palpable tension. Albert knew what he had to do. The trust they had was shattered, and he couldn't see a way to piece it back together. "I can't do this, Anouk. I can't be with someone who betrays me like this," Albert said, his voice firm. Anouk's eyes filled with tears. "Albert, please, I'm sorry. I made a terrible mistake. We can work through this." But Albert knew there was no going back. The love he had for her was now tainted with a bitterness he couldn't shake off. "I want a divorce, Anouk," he said, the words feeling surreal even as they left his lips. Anouk gasped, her face crumpling in pain. But Albert was resolute. He stood up, his heart heavy with a grief he couldn't yet comprehend. He had loved her, trusted her, and now, he was walking away from the life they had built together. As he left the room, Anouk's sobs filled the air, a haunting reminder of what they had lost. Albert knew this was just the beginning of a painful journey, but he also knew it was the only way forward. The weeks following the confrontation were a blur for Albert. The once familiar walls of their home felt cold and alien. Each corner held memories of a life that now felt like a distant dream. The divorce proceedings were set in motion, a stark, painful reminder of the chasm that had opened up in his life. But amidst the turmoil, a seed of determination took root in Albert. He refused to let this betrayal define him. He started by clearing out their shared belongings, each item a step in reclaiming his space, his identity. The house slowly transformed, echoing Albert's internal metamorphosis. Albert realized that he had, over the years, neglected his own passions and interests. He decided it was time to reconnect with the parts of himself that had been overshadowed by his role as a husband. He returned to his old hobby of painting, something he had set aside in the busy years of his marriage. The act of putting brush to canvas was therapeutic, each stroke a release of the emotions bottled up inside him. He also joined a local gym. The physical exertion was a welcome distraction, and with time, he began to see changes not just in his physique but in his confidence. The gym became a sanctuary, a place where he could channel his energy and frustration into something positive. Albert also rekindled old friendships. He had not realized how much he had isolated himself, how many connections he had let slip away. His friends welcomed him back with open arms, providing support and companionship that he hadn't realized he was missing. They encouraged him to try new activities, and soon, Albert found himself enrolled in a cooking class, discovering a new passion for culinary arts. Perhaps the most significant change came when Albert decided to travel. He had always dreamed of visiting Europe, a dream he and Anouk had shared but never realized. Now, he decided to embark on the journey alone. The trip was eye-opening. He wandered through ancient streets, sampled exotic foods, and met people from all walks of life. The experience was invigorating, a stark contrast to the monotonous routine of his previous life. As he traveled, Albert journaled his experiences. He wrote not only about the places he visited but also about his feelings, his growth, and his reflections on the life he was leaving behind. Writing became a form of self-expression and introspection, helping him process his emotions and envision a future full of possibilities. Albert returned from his travels a changed man. The hurt and betrayal still lingered, but they no longer consumed him. He had rediscovered his zest for life, his independence, and his ability to find joy in new experiences. One evening, as he sat in his revamped living room, surrounded by his paintings and travel souvenirs, Albert realized he had turned a corner. He had emerged from the shadow of his failed marriage stronger, more aware of who he was and what he wanted from life. The journey had not been easy, but Albert knew that it was necessary. He had built a new life for himself, one that was rich and fulfilling in ways he had never imagined. And as he looked ahead, he felt a sense of hope and excitement for what the future held. Months had passed since Albert's return from Europe, and with each passing day, his transformation became more pronounced. The timid, heartbroken man who had once been unable to face the world was now a distant memory. In his place stood a confident, driven individual, ready to embrace life's challenges. Albert's newfound confidence wasn't just an internal change, it was reflected in every aspect of his life. At work, he took on more responsibilities and pursued innovative projects. His colleagues noticed the change, and soon, Albert found himself being offered a promotion. It was a testament to his hard work and newfound dedication. This professional success was a sweet victory, a clear sign that he was moving in the right direction. But Albert's transformation wasn't just confined to his career. His social life, once a neglected aspect of his existence, was now thriving. He had become a regular at local events, often surrounded by friends who were drawn to his charismatic personality. He even started dating again, albeit cautiously. His relationships were now built on mutual respect and understanding, a far cry from the dependency and insecurity of his past. One of the most fulfilling outcomes of Albert's journey was his involvement in community projects. He volunteered at local charities and participated in events that aimed to bring people together. He found a sense of purpose in helping others, a fulfillment that his previous life had lacked. As Albert's life continued to improve, he became an inspiration to those around him. People were drawn to his story of resilience and transformation. He began to share his experiences, speaking at local gatherings and workshops, encouraging others to embrace change and overcome adversity. Anouk, who had been a distant figure since their divorce, came back into the picture during this time. She had heard about Albert's successes and changes. One day, she approached him, a mix of curiosity and regret in her eyes. They met at a cafe they once frequented, a place that held memories of their life together. Anouk looked different to Albert, or perhaps it was his perception of her that had changed. She spoke of her life, her voice tinged with remorse. She had been through a tough time, grappling with the consequences of her actions. Anouk confessed her regret, admitting that seeing Albert's transformation made her realize the magnitude of her mistake. She hinted at a desire to rekindle their relationship, to be part of his new life. But as Albert listened, he felt no anger or bitterness. Instead, he felt a sense of detachment, an understanding that their paths had irrevocably diverged. He had forgiven her, not for her sake, but for his peace of mind. He wished her well, but he knew that their chapter had closed. As they parted ways, Albert felt a sense of closure. He had come full circle, from the depths of despair to a place of peace and contentment. The pain of the past had given way to a hopeful present and an optimistic future. Albert walked away from the cafe, the sun setting behind him, casting a warm glow. He smiled to himself, grateful for the journey he had undertaken. He had risen from the ashes of his old life, and now, the world was full of endless possibilities. As autumn arrived, bringing with it a tapestry of orange and red hues, Albert found himself in a reflective mood. The trees shedding their leaves reminded him of his own journey of letting go and renewal. He had come a long way from the man who was broken by betrayal. Albert's life was now a harmonious blend of work, hobbies, and social commitments. He had established a routine that was both fulfilling and balanced. His evenings were often spent in the art studio he had set up in his home, where he lost himself in his paintings, or out in the community, where he had become a respected figure. Despite the positive changes, there were moments when the past crept up on him. Memories of Anouk, their life together, the good times before everything fell apart. But these moments of nostalgia were no longer painful. They were mere echoes of a past life, reminders of how far he had come. One such evening, as Albert was walking home, he was surprised to find Anouk waiting outside his house. There was a vulnerability about her that he hadn't seen before. She looked older, somehow smaller, and her eyes held a deep sadness. "Albert, can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated for a moment but then nodded. They sat on a nearby bench, the crisp autumn air around them. Anouk spoke first, her words tumbling out in a rush. She talked about her life after the divorce, how things hadn't gone the way she had hoped. She had been through a series of short-lived relationships, each one leaving her more disillusioned than the last. She had lost friends, respect, and her sense of self in the process. "I've had a lot of time to think," she said, looking down at her hands. "And I've realized how much I lost when I lost you. I see now how selfish I was, how I took your love for granted." Albert listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. He could see the genuine remorse in Anouk's eyes, the wish for a different past. "Anouk, I've forgiven you," he finally said. "But that part of my life, our life, is over. I've moved on." Anouk nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I know, and I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know how sorry I am." They sat in silence for a while, lost in their own thoughts. The sun had set, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the evening sky. Eventually, Anouk stood up. "Goodbye, Albert," she said softly. "I'm glad to see you happy." As she walked away, Albert felt a profound sense of peace. He had come to terms with his past, and he was genuinely hopeful for his future. In the weeks and months that followed, Albert continued to thrive. He found love again, a deep and mature love with someone who shared his passions and values. His art was featured in a local exhibit, and his professional life continued to prosper. Albert often thought about the twists and turns of life, how moments of deep pain can lead to profound growth. He was grateful for his journey, for it had shaped him into the man he was today. As he sat in his studio, a blank canvas in front of him, he realized that every ending was a chance for a new beginning. And with a smile, he began to paint, the colors bright and bold, a reflection of his journey, his loss, his healing, and his hope.